Okay, everyone, welcome to episode 6 of our 2019 Rugby Canada Match Official Professional Development webinar series. Tonight we're going to take a little look at refereeing restarts and lineout and just some of the obviously key components of those phases of the game. So by the end of tonight, we're hoping to do a few things. First is obviously understand how we can manage restarts, notably contests in the air, our role as referees in setting up the lineout for success. Ultimately, with lineouts being a form of restarting the game, we want to make sure we're able to do that quickly. Make sure we're on top of the foul play that can evolve from the lineout. And then at the very end, I'm going to give us a quick update on the World Rugby High Tackle Framework that was released and what Rugby Canada's plans are for the implementation of that framework. Great, so as we always do, we're going to take a quick look at how this phase of the game or these phases of the game relate to the Rugby Canada referee profile. So just a reminder, the profile is available up on the Rugby Canada website under HQ and Match Official Development. The biggest component nowadays, obviously, with restarts is the need to be vigilant around contests in the air. And our lineouts will have a similar approach. And we'll get into this a little bit as we go through the presentation. But basically, there's that area of focus where the referee needs to be attending to what's happening in the air, and then obviously very quickly moving to what happens down on the ground once the jumper comes down. So the actual components as they relate to the referee profile are listed here from a technical, tactical, and game management perspective. I put down progression of sanctions for game management just in case. There's a few incidences of foul play that arise at the lineout especially, so just making sure that everyone's on top of that. But I mean, the rest of it's pretty simple, looking at clear numbers at the lineout from a technical perspective, rewarding space, whether it's in the air or around the maul or around 10 meters back from the lineout, that kind of thing. Contextual judgment, we'll get into that a little bit at the end, especially with our notes for our coaches of match officials when it comes to decisions around the lineout. And then finally, when it comes to our game management, that we're communicating clearly, we're setting things up clearly, and then our zero tolerance for foul play, as always, with regard to issues that put players in vulnerable positions. So we'll get into some of that as we go through this presentation. So we're going to start with restarts, and as we always do, we really want to try and emphasize how it is that we can really set ourselves up for success. So your first 3 steps off the mark, really critical to making sure that we put ourselves in a credible position. We want to make sure the kickoff is credible, whether it's where the kicker ends up kicking the ball or how far ahead or not players are in front of the kicker. And then finally, we want to make sure we put ourselves in the best position to see our potential contact in the air. So we'll take a look at a couple of video examples. So as we do for most of these presentations, we'll watch the video through and then we'll come back and take another quick look at some of the content of the clip and unpack it a little bit. So, clear communication by the referee, but I think what we would want to make sure we do is have the kicker in a bit more of a credible position. However, at the very least, we have a pretty good onside chase, which is great. But I think 2 or 3 meters here, 2 meters here from our kicker is probably a little bit too far ahead of the line. So we just want to make it look as credible as we can. However, the referee's movements after that were actually quite good in terms of finding that space where she's able to see that contest as it might happen. So we'll just take one more look, and we'll just try and remind them at the next kick kickoff about where we want them to take that kick. I don't think we need to do anything more with it here, but we do want to be aware of it and what does it look like. So we'll see an example of what it looks like when it's really well done here. So it's pretty simple stuff, but it is important for the look and feel of what we're doing, especially as we kick off a game. Makes us, helps us demonstrate that we're on top of what our role is when we're out there on the field. So we'll see here Dale has a really credible kickoff by the kicker. Line is nice and behind the kick. Not sure what the winger might be, but I'm sure we're okay. And then we see Dale's first 3 steps here off the mark. He really pushes himself forward, gives himself some good acceleration, and then angles in at a position to be able to see what could be that next point of contact and that next contest. So especially when that ball is deep, really gunning forward, making sure we're getting to that next point of contact from the attack side as quick as we can, depending obviously on what the team receiving the ball does. So I thought the referee here also did a very good job of putting himself in a position to be able to see that next point of contact or contest, especially here knowing that we're really trying to graze that 10-meter line in order to give Red give themselves the best opportunity to contest the ball and retrieve the ball off the kickoff. I thought the referee did a really good job here, making sure they were in a position to see what it is they needed to see here. Ball travel 10, slowed down just a tad, just to make sure he was in a good spot to see what he needed to see there. I thought that was well done. One of the things, I went back and forth on was, did I need to specify sevens specific restarts or not? And I decided not to. We will do a refereeing sevens webinar in September, I believe. In the meantime, I think what I wanted to get across is that although we see more contested kickoffs in sevens, we do see it now in 15s far more than we probably ever have. So it is a point that we need to be aware of going into our games, is that teams may be kicking off in order to try and retrieve their own kick. So this brings us to our next point, contests in the air. So the framework by which, if I can use that word, by which we make our decisions regarding contests in the air actually comes from 2015 and hasn't changed. So the law application guide from that time is still available on the World Rugby website, and we can go and take a look at that at the end if we need. But what the most important part is, are we ensuring that the players, and we can't physically ensure that, but when we make our decisions, are the players who are contesting in a credible position to retrieve the ball, especially on the team that kicks. So the kicking team, anyone who's chasing that kick, we really want to make sure that their timing is accurate. And the other thing we expect is that there is a contest in the air. Right, we do expect now that players, if they want to try and contest that ball, especially at the highest levels, we won't always see it at the lower levels of the game, especially at the higher levels of the game, we will see teams with the receiving player going up in the air, and we do expect that the chaser also goes up in the air. And the reason for that is because it ensures that they at least are now focused on trying to put themselves in a position to retrieve the ball, and if not, then they may be more inclined to back away as opposed to trying to put themselves in a position on the ground to retrieve the ball. So the criteria listed here by World Rugby in terms of what it is we're looking at when it comes to play-ons, penalties, yellow cards, and red cards. So what we'll do is we'll run through the examples listed on the website. So we actually will go there. I just realized we... yes, we will go there and we will take a look at those, and then we'll come back and take a look at an example from this past weekend, actually, with the Canada U20 men's game. So bear with me one moment, I apologize. In the meantime, as we wait for this to load, actually, why don't you can just take a look at our example here. We'll play this one through. So we see Robin here doing a really good job again off the kickoff, putting himself in a position to see what he needed to see, right? Kicks somewhat deep, deeper than 10, but in a spot where USA clearly feels like they can contest for the ball. All right, and what we'll notice here is just a timing issue, right? However, what we'll see as we go through the criteria is how does the player from red land and how is Robin adjudicating this in real time? So if we go back here and play it again, what we'll see is that we have the blue player's timing is off. Robin felt as though because the player was not in a credible position to catch the ball, as well as the red player landing somewhat dangerously, that Robin felt a yellow card was warranted. In slow-mo or with television match officials, would we be able to reduce that sanction to a penalty? Potentially. And the reason for that is it doesn't appear as though the red player initially lands on their side. They seem to land on their feet and then fall over, hands and feet and then fall over. And then we also don't have a pulling action by the blue player. So, but in real time, what we have to do as referees is start at a certain level and see if we can work our way down. Unfortunately, Robin just didn't see enough for him to be able to work his way down to a penalty only, which is fine. That's just the nature of the beast. It's the game we play, and it's the decisions we as referees, will try our best to make and put ourselves in the best position to make it. But at the end of the day, we'd rather err on the side of caution than not. So I think that website is up and running. So let's go here. Right, so what World Rugby has done here is just given us some examples of where's a play on, where's a yellow card, and what's a red card, and a penalty only. So we'll look at a couple of issues, a couple of things. The reason why we went with the World Rugby site instead of trying to find video is because the multiple angles and the visual from the timing perspective is a lot easier to see from professionally televised games as opposed to some amateur game film. So it's just to try and give ourselves the best opportunity to see what needs to be seen here. Right, so it's a really good play on here by the referee. Right, we clearly see that the chaser, who actually was the kicker, puts himself in a very good position, and the collision is virtually at the same time, at the same height. Both players going for the ball were able to play away from this, and this is probably the best example of how we can play on. Difficult to see in real time as opposed to some of the other actions or tighter actions. But if this is the picture we're able to pick up on the field, I think we're in a really good spot here to be able to say play on. So we'll play that one more time all the way through here. So like I said, that collision happens at the same height, at the same time, both players going for the ball. We're able to get going. All right, and here we'll take a look at the examples of penalty only, yellow card, red card. I'll play the whole clip all the way through, and then we can come back and take a look at some of the examples. Okay, so time to unpack this just a little bit. Some of it's fairly clear on the replays, but here we have obviously the chasing player 14, White, who ends up probably getting the worst of it because their timing's off and they're not in a legitimate opportunity for them to contest for the ball. He doesn't pull down the receiving player in blue. And so although he lands on his side, it's just one of those instances where we can probably play on. Here, obviously, we see the timing is a little bit worse by yellow, and we do see that they get underneath the legs of the player in green trying to receive the ball, and then that player is put in a dangerous position or vulnerable position where they land on their side without being able to control their body, right? So that's a little bit more reckless and would warrant a yellow card in that situation. Finally, obviously, with the red card, we see the first trigger for us as a referee would be that the player chasing in gold here, number 14, does not come off the ground to contest for the ball in the air, but instead just runs into some space. So this goes back to that notion of are we rewarding space and the space that's earned? That includes space in the air now. That's basically how we need to start looking at it. The space in the air and the space underneath that player who's in the air needs to be respected and needs to be protected by the referee. And so here it's an easy decision for a red card with the timing of the chaser and the position they put the receiver in when they go up in the air is critical to ensuring that we get the right decision here with a red card. So now some of these kicks are obviously happening in open play, but the principle of what it is we're trying to look for is the exact same, whether that's off a restart or in open play. So just making sure that we are in a position to see these pictures. We'll also get to our next webinar series in July will be on rewarding space and offside, whether it's in open play or at ruck time or off box kicks, that kind of thing. And we'll look at how does that, managing that situation maybe help us with this type of scenario where there's a kick chase and a contest in the air. However, for the meantime, what we're trying to do is get that picture of contact in the air or contest in the air. These are the things we want it to look like and what we don't want it to look like. So I hope that helps give us a bit of a better picture. I see there's a couple of questions, so I think now is probably a good time to take a look at a couple. Yes, sorry, Karen mentioned I misspoke on one of the examples. The example of foul play, as opposed to the first clip, which is a play on here with the two players colliding in the air at the same height at the same time. I may have said play on here for this first instance of foul play, but really what we're trying to make sure we do is call a penalty here. So this is a penalty only situation that we can potentially play some advantage from depending on the level, but we see the mistiming here. So this is clearly a penalty, and we just need to make sure we have that picture right in our minds. Okay, thanks for that, Karen. Excellent. Okay, lineouts. So what we did not do was set up a separate Maul webinar, but we will touch on Maul formations and adjudicating the Maul throughout this portion of the presentation. So that'll be coming up at the end. But what we'll do is again, get to the point where we help ourselves and help the players by making sure that we're setting ourselves up and setting the players up for success with how we ensure the line out is set up. So the first being that we have clear numbers, a clear gap, and those are the two big ones. Now, the laws obviously pertaining to quick throw-ins are different, and so where players stand is obviously going to be different as well. We don't get into the quick throw-in because basically it's not a huge piece around setup, around adjudication, right? It's really just making sure we're on top of what the laws are. If we have time at the end and people really want a refresher, we can just take a look at the laws site for World Rugby and just make sure everyone's on top of when is a quick throw in on and where can we take it from and that kind of thing. So we'll take a look at a couple of examples of lineout setup. So here's an example of what it looks like when it's really messy and we don't have a clear idea of what our numbers are and where our gap is. Right, so the outcome is something we can certainly play away from. There's no need to reset this line out or bring it back or anything. But what we do is at a certain point, we set the line out and we have a distinct number of individuals who are in the line out, which for this gold and striped team would be 2 to start with 4 receivers potentially. We're all really far away, right? And so what we're trying to get to, my apologies, is a point where when we set the line out after the quick throw in is not on anymore, that we have a clear idea of who the numbers are and who the receiver is, right? And it's just to ensure that we're setting up the line out to be successful. No issues with this particular one, right? But we do want to make sure that we have a better setup going into our lineouts moving forward. Okay, so in this example, I think the referee does a really great job at the very beginning of an early game situation line out, making sure that there's an understanding from the players of where he'd like them to stand and where he'd like that gap to be set. Unfortunately, he's trying to manage a 10-meter offside line as the ball's being thrown in. So lucky for him, he's got assistant referees and everything is able to move on hunky-dory, and we don't really need to worry too much about the outcome of the lineout because no information came in. However, obviously in the games that we will mostly be refereeing on a week-to-week basis and we don't have assistant referees, we obviously need to manage this a little bit differently. So we'll take a look at an example of where we do manage it differently, and we'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, just having that awareness of let's not allow that throw in until we're happy with our setup. That setup does include that 10-meter offside line. So just making sure we have it all ready to go and that everyone's on the same page about what we want these lineouts to look like. So here's an example of how we manage lineouts when we're not really thrilled with how they're getting set up here. So we see different numbers coming in. No one's really clear what we're doing. So Robin does a really good job here. Time off, sort out with the line what he wants to see. The AR helps him out by preventing the hooker from being able to throw in. And then we eventually get to have our line out. So yeah, what we don't mind with the walking into the line out is if players do walk in and they become stationary and then make a move one way or another or not. As long as they're walking, they set, and then we're able to move into the lineup from there. But what we can't have is just players from 5-10 meters back without being clear about what their numbers are, walking into the line, right, and going straight up in the air. Because what we do is change the numbers, and we don't give the defensive team an opportunity necessarily to be able to contest the ball. Sometimes we do, but it doesn't negate the fact that we shouldn't be allowing the action to start with. Okay, those are really the big things around setup. So a couple of other pieces we can take away from these two clips here are the fact that one good strategy for setting up the gap is ensuring that, and this can start pregame, So the referee has a chat with the two players at the front of the lineout saying, here's where I'd like you to stand, here's where I'd like you to stand. Please line up your team on you in terms of making sure we now have that clear gap, right? And then in the next instance, my apologies, we have the referee, although the AR does the help here with the hooker and not being able to throw the ball in, it is also something the referee can do and say, hey, can you please put the ball on the ground or not throw it just yet? I need to get this line set up, and then we can move on from there. So a couple of really good takeaways from those pieces around lineup setup as well, making sure we have those clear numbers. And off we go. Excellent. All right, a couple of focus areas that we want to make sure we are on top of when it comes to refereeing the lineout. So the first is the Maul Formation for the attacking team. So making sure that lifters don't obstruct and our ball transfer is hand to hand. So we'll take a look at a few examples. We have 3 of them. I do. Right, so World Rugby provided these clips back in 2015. My apologies again. And what we'll do is play it again, but it's not a tactic we see so much anymore. But I like this video because it gives us 3 clear examples of things that we do need to be vigilant of, right? So we don't want to see any of these 3 actions, whether they happen all at once or only one of them happens at the lineout. We do want to make sure we're on top of the situation. Now, if this is the first line out of the game, would I necessarily penalize this? Maybe not. I think what I'd take a look at is making sure I address this with the teams and ensure that they put themselves in a better position. So I'm just gonna, go back through this slowly as I was speaking earlier. So I do wanna just pause. So Ripper must stay attached to the catcher or jumper. So the first player in outside of the lifters. So if we have our 2 lifters on either side here of the jumper, they get in a position to try and obviously protect that player and get ready to form the maul. Our number 8 is the next player in. They should be attached to the jumper here before they rip the ball. Obviously our 7 gold then joins in from in front of the hind foot, notably because the 8 gold is stepping backwards in the maul. And then, yeah, we don't want players sliding back in the maul. It's just a question of trying to maintain the integrity of the maul, given the fact that it already is a form of quote unquote obstruction in the game. But it's also a safety issue in some cases because at lower levels, we're having players actually moving counter to the direction we want them move that we would like to see them move in. So instead of players moving backwards or sliding backwards in a maul, we need to see everyone moving forwards. Okay. Okay, so again, in 2015, World Rugby used these videos, and these are still examples of how we want to see the maul formed. So as we come down, we have the ripper, number 1 coming through here in a position where they're attached to the jumper, ripping the ball, and then obviously when our hooker comes in after the throw, they join from the hind foot and the ball is passed back to them, transferred back, right? Really easy, clear how it is we'd like to see them all formed. Okay. When it comes to our defense, we want to ensure that there's a whole litany of things they're not doing, but essentially the compete has to be timing wise very good. So some of the instances we don't necessarily see, that we one of the things that we typically see at the lower levels is just poor timing on the sack or poor timing on the contest or the counter push off the maul when it comes to doing it a little too early before the jumper's on the ground. So just making sure we keep an eye on that. Another couple of examples we'll look at are these ones here. So we'll just take a look at where some issues can arise. Okay, so this one's a bit tougher to see, but it's a really good example of the team in gold taking out number 8 here, who was one of the lifters. And if they get that timing even a fraction earlier, they put the jumper in a really, really vulnerable position where it could be potentially quite dangerous. So what we do want to do is make sure that defenders are trying to sack or contest the jumper only until that maul forms, and then as the maul progresses, then obviously players can join as long as they're from the hind foot and through the gate, right? So seeing those pictures, it's clear here that our first defender by gold is going after number 8 black here, which in different scenario could put number 4 black in a much more vulnerable position. So we need to eliminate this picture from what we see. By the way, did I through all 3 of these videos back? I did not go through this one. Sorry, going back one sec to our attacking maul. What we need to do is obviously see the maul stay straight, and if it's going to shear off and move in a different direction, the ball actually has to be at the front at that point, unless it's more of a natural wheel to it. But if the players are deliberately going to move away from the maul and have the ball move in a different direction, the ball must be at the front. So we'll take a look at this example here by orange. So we'll just come back to that replay where we see number 5 orange here kind of join in front as the as the ball carrier, I guess, moves to the back, and then we'll see 2 players in front of that ball carrier here. My apologies, sorry, 6 and 1, I believe it is, who end up deliberately moving away from the maul, and the ball's still at the back, right? So that would be obstruction. It's just another picture we need to be aware of. If that play is going to deliberately move away from the maul, we need to see the ball at the front of there. Okay, sorry, back to the defense. So the other one is obviously swimming up the side of the maul. And although this looks like it's okay, it's really not, given where 8 started, right? So number 8 started in a position where he was further back on the maul, and the only reason why he was able to get in there was because he then swam up the side of the maul. So we'll take another quick look here. Number 5's not too bad because he stays in that same position the whole time, but we see number 8 move into that separate position from the side of the maul in order to try and get ahead. So one more real quick look here. See number 5, and then number 8 inside him, who keeps moving up the side of the maul here. Okay, and we eventually come back to the penalty. Okay, now the other scenario we often see is defenses not contesting the line out and then not contesting the maul and hoping for an obstruction decision. So The way that we want to look to adjudicate this now is to have the defenders ensure that they stay on the line the whole time. So oftentimes at lower levels of the game, and even the very top levels of the game, we see the defenders actually move away from the line before the ball has left the line out. So we do need to make sure that we eliminate that. If the defense is going to try this tactic, they must literally be perfect in order for them to get the reward, just because of the impact that it can have on the game. Now, that being said, attacking team players or players that are jumping need to be aware that if they transfer the ball before contact has been made and before the maul forms, that they are liable to have obstruction be the decision or accidental obstruction be the decision. So this is an example, and believe it or not, all of the examples I have had other issues, but what I couldn't find was leaving the line out before the line out was over by the defending team. So this is an example of when it's done really, really well, but after we watch it, we'll go through the scenarios where we just want to be vigilant of those actions and what could lead to the referee making a different decision. So this one happens quite quickly, and we'll just walk through it one more time here. But once we get our setup right, everything's good to go. Right, so at this point, we do not have a maul, and the ball is just about to be transferred back here from the jumper to number 6. As soon as the ball is transferred to number 6, the ball has technically left the line out. So for blue now to be able to come around and contest is legal. What we see here is blue does a good job of, we call it parting the seas. They simply move into the spaces along the side of the line, their line of touch, but they do not leave the line out. So blue does a really good job here of doing this tactic perfectly. Obviously, you run the risk of the ball stays at the front and they just take that space and off they go. So it ended up working out. This was probably at a time when this was just coming into the game. I think there's a little bit more awareness now of the fact that it could happen. So I don't know if we'd often see this on our 5-meter line as much anymore, but that's the picture we want to see if we're going to see this played effectively by the defense. So once that transfer has happened, this blue player now to come and contest where that ball is, perfectly legitimate, and we can play on. Now, where we would run into some problems is if before the transfer happened, so once this player comes down, my apologies again, once the jumper comes down, okay, if any of the blue players were to retreat off the line of touch at this point, before that transfer happens, they would be penalized or free kicked for leaving the line out early, right? So we can't have players leaving the line out early. The other option is obviously if the other thing that could happen is if this transfer happens and then black moves forward and blue tries to contest at the front, then we could have an accidental obstruction decision against the black team. Now, we do want to be vigilant that blue has to be in a very, very strong position, and they have to be and when I say strong position, what I mean is they have to have done this perfectly the whole way through. The reason for that is because we don't want to necessarily reward the defense for what is perceived at times to be a negative action. Now, granted, I'm all for being creative and wanting us to see that players are able to react to the environment in front of them. We want to see this player, before making that transfer, actually have the maul form around them. So for us to simply penalize blue for the sake of it is not on. What we do need to do is make sure they do this absolutely correctly in order for us to be able to give that reward for either the accidental obstruction or to see this player come around and play the ball from that position. Okay, so those are the big ones there. Okay, a couple more slides to go. So our notes for coaches and match officials. Obviously, as we always do, we want to take this back to our pre-match. Is our referee focused on the process of the restart or lineout? So I just put down some trigger words that have worked for me in the past, or some other people's trigger words that have worked, just to make sure we're identifying the things we need to either work on ourselves, whether that's the first 3 steps, like I say here, with regard to our movement off the mark from the kick. Or is it something like no contest, just being aware, or contest, so if it's contest in the air, I'm aware that there is going to be this potential for contest. No contest in the sense of that lineout situation, just that trigger word to remind me that this could happen. What do I need to be aware of? And then timing, another one for contact in the air, and then or as well as the taking out those lifters in the lineout, making sure that everyone's timing going into contact in those phases of the game is accurate. And swimming, just that picture of players coming along the side of the maul to defend it, as opposed to through the middle. So this is what I alluded to earlier in the webinar, where we needed to find that balance between that technical, tactical, and game management pillars of our referee profile. So there are times when we look at a line out and players are walking in, that given the context of the game, we might not necessarily want to bring that back and stop the play from being able to restart. Our decision making here at the line out especially needs to be about, are we able to restart the game fairly, but are we also able to restart the game quickly, right? We don't want to be spending days and days looking at establishing the particular nuances of clear numbers and clear gap. As long as we're able to see those things, I think we can find a way to move on from those actions and be able to play on. Anytime that we do have an issue on certain parts of the field where we need to be able to ensure that there is a more fair contest in some cases, when it comes to making sure that things are set up properly, then great. Let's make sure that we make those decisions to reset that line out and ensure that everyone's on the same page. That being said, I do mention communication here because a lot of what we can do around managing how the line out forms and where our line is drawn in terms of yes and no's is done pre-game. So making sure that our communication pre-game with players is clear about where we'd like certain players to stand, especially those who are consistently tend to be at the front of the lineup, typically our loose heads. And then making sure that everyone else is aware that we want to see players set at the line. If they are going to walk, that we have a stop or a pause or some sort of movement after they get in there in order to ensure that everyone's on the same page with how many numbers we have and where our gap is. Okay, and then obviously, finally, safety is always our #1 priority. So wanting to make sure that referees are in good positions to see potential flashpoints, whether that's contest in the air at kickoff, whether that is contest in the air at the lineout, where we have players pulling down potentially, or actions that could put the jumper in jeopardy or in vulnerable positions. So making sure that the referee is able to position themselves to see these things. Again, with assistant referees, we can be more flexible in terms of having both sides of the lineup covered. When it comes to when we're on our own, oftentimes putting ourselves at the front or the back of the lineout is really dependent on how we feel the game is going, what team trends tend to be, and what parts of the field we might be at in order to make sure we're in a good position to see that formation of the maul, the defense of the maul, and then obviously if there is no contest, how we ensure that we're seeing the right pictures from the defense, etc. What I would encourage referees to do is to not necessarily mix things up for the sake of mixing things up. What they do want to do is get themselves in a position where they're able to identify trends and see if those are trends that can help them with their positioning. So if inside their own 22-meter, Team Blue is consistently throwing to the front, then it's probably best for the referee to be at the front of the lineout. If other parts of the field is when they mix it up between their middle and back jumpers, great. Then we can have the referee move to the back and be able to adjudicate that way. So you're never going to be able to know off the bat which direction we are going to be going and where we want to stand for the very first few. I would probably suggest that the very first line out of the game, we're spending at the front. We establish our lines, we establish where we want our front person in the lineout to stand, and then we can move accordingly. Okay. All right. Please feel free to put any questions that we might have on restarts and lineouts into the box. I'm going to just finish off with a couple of pieces around our priorities regarding player welfare. So a couple of weeks ago, World Rugby came out with their high tackle decision framework for referees to help them through making decisions with dangerous and high tackles. So there's just 3 points here and then a couple of other things I wanted to touch on. So like I said, a couple of weeks ago, World Rugby will implement they will implement the framework at all current and upcoming international events. So the U20 Championships is currently using it. The U20 Trophy will be using it later in July. And then obviously the August test matches in preparation for the World Cup, and the World Cup will all use the high tackle framework, as well as the Women's Super Series coming up in July down in San Diego as well. So what does that mean for us? We did some extensive consultation with the refereeing community, the coaching community, and as well as a few of our administrators. So we have come to the conclusion that we will be implementing the high tackle framework effective July 1st of this year. So there was a couple of concerns. One was around whether or not we should wait until September, as we have done in previous trial situations. The worry was that was a bit too long for an issue around player welfare, and obviously we've come back to, well, we can't just implement it right away without some sort of distribution and training to go along with it, as what we don't want is for scenarios where referees maybe use this framework ineffectually to bring us down from what should be higher level sanctions, and then we end up in a situation after the fact where there's a potential controversial decision incident that could lead to some serious injury. So we just want to make sure that we have everyone on the same page as to how the framework works. So there will be in the coming days an announcement of how the framework will be rolled out, and then in the coming weeks there will be opportunities for those training sessions for coaches, players, match officials, administrators, parents, anyone involved in the game will be able to attend, and then we'll also do a little piece online. I do want to encourage referees to attend the in-person sessions. It is easier and more reliable form of checking for understanding and making sure that officials are on the same page. Oftentimes with webinars with massive amounts of people, there's only so much understanding that we can check for. And I think we would rather be in a position where we can confirm far more understanding of how this applies as opposed to less. So I would encourage match officials especially to please attend those in-person sessions coming up in the next couple of weeks. The other point, and I don't have it written down here, but I do want us to be aware of, is the fact that it does not indicate there is no change in law. So the laws of the game have remained the same. The framework is designed to allow us to have a decision-making process that will hopefully lead to more consistent decisions by referees, but most importantly, to encourage players to change their behavior when it comes to completing the tackle in order to try and obviously make a much safer game. So that's the goal of the framework, and we hope that it'll be effective over the next few months and certainly over the next year as well as we implement it and go moving forward. All right, and then finally our last reminder about our tolerance for zero tolerance for foul play. So these are the same application of law as the framework. It's just the examples in the framework certainly extend beyond these videos here from 2017. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, we'll also be amending the content on Rugby Canada's YouTube site to ensure that we have consistency in the visuals and that everyone's on the same page with how this application will differ just slightly from the application guide or the implementation guide from 2017. Okay, that's what we had for today. I'll give it just a minute or two or three to see if we have any questions. But I do appreciate everyone's time, and I certainly appreciate everyone's patience when it comes to the World Rugby High Tackle Framework. We will be obviously rolling that out, but in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, feel free to fire away. And hopefully we have a little bit more of an understanding of what it is we want to try and do with restarts and lineouts to make sure that we set ourselves up for success and that we get some good clean restarts to get the game going again. Okay, I don't see any questions. So I think I will end it there. I want to thank everyone for their time this evening, and I hope to see you again in about a month's time as we get ready for offsides and rewarding dominant space. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good night.